This is Locally Sourced Spirituality with John Paul, encouraging sustainable and organic spiritual practices. You don't have to go anywhere to find the holy. It's right under your feet.
All right, I'm back. This is Locally Sourced Spirituality, and I'm John Paul. I want to invite you to the Locally Sourced Spirituality Facebook group. That's a good spot for you to leave some feedback, some suggestions or requests, or just to be in community and conversation about things that we talk about on this podcast. If you listen to this podcast on iTunes, iTunes podcasts, please go and give a review. It's hard to know who's listening and who's out there without that feedback. So I'd appreciate that. And plus, it gives this podcast a little bit more exposure. If you want to see me, or if you would be willing to interact on a more face-to-face level, I would love for you to come. I will be preaching this Sunday and every Sunday, starting now, at the Asbury United Methodist Church on Lake Lansing Road in Lansing, Michigan. That's this Sunday, July 9th, will be my first Sunday here. Because indeed I have moved. I was local in Ludington, and I took a month off from this podcast to do the transition, and now I am here in Lansing. And it's a different life, that's for sure. And I'm mindful of the things that I've left behind. It's easy to be overwhelmed. It's easy to be taken up by the things that I've gained. Indeed, I've gained much. There's lots of people that have welcomed me and have shown hospitality. And there are resources very close at hand. There are lots of things at my fingertips that wasn't available to me before. And it's been lots of fun. In fact, last night I took my family to a Lansing Lugnuts baseball game. It's a single-A minor league baseball team here in Lansing, and it was a good time. It was July 4th, and they had fireworks, and most of my family had a good time. My 7-year-old got a little tired because it was well past his bedtime by the time everything ended. But then I go back to the things that I've left behind, and those things I've left behind sort of cause an ache in my spirit. I guess what I'm talking about is primarily those relationships that I've left behind. Those friendships, those pastoral relationships, those people that have loved and cared for me and my family, and the people that I have cared deeply for the past 6 years. So I've lost that. I've lost a sense of familiarity. We've been here in this place for a week, and we still don't feel like we are locals. I guess that'll take some time, but we still feel a bit out of place. And we left behind a lifestyle. There's a lifestyle over in Ludington. Ludington is a beach community. It's a tourist community, and it's a different sort of lifestyle. Having Lake Michigan just a few miles from your house, a body of water that you cannot see across. There's something about that. It does something to the people. It does something to your spirit. And to sit there on the beach as the waves come rolling in, as the breeze and sometimes the really strong wind that comes off the lake, it does something to your spirit. It energizes in a way that I cannot explain. You'd have to be there to experience it. I took the kids there a few days before we left, and they were having fun diving into the waves and enjoying the environment. And I didn't make a big deal about that being our last trip, because of course we can always go back to Lake Michigan. But there's something special about having that in your backyard. And so we left that behind. And then we're also living a slower pace of life. When I would record the podcast before this, I was in my little office, and it was on the corner of a road that goes through the rolling hills of the orchards, and that was a paved road, but the crossroad was a gravel road, and sometimes I would be recording and I would stop because there was a tractor that was going by that was kind of loud. And now I'm here in this place, and I'm on Lake Lansing Road, and traffic is constant. And I went to my office, and I could constantly hear the traffic going by outside. So I find myself in a different room on the other side of the building, and I'm in a lounge area that is a sort of a foyer to a ladies' room. So it's a little weird, but it's a nice room. They have nice leather chairs, and they have a nice rug. So it's pretty slow, so I hope I won't get in any trouble. But it's definitely not the ladies' room. It's the room before the ladies' room. So don't think that I'm in some inappropriate place. And so we were having a lot of lasts. We were visiting coffee shops. Our last trip to the coffee shop. Our last trip to the beach. A lot of last things. And there was a lot of anxiety, unspoken mostly, about the unknown future. We didn't know what it was going to be like. We didn't know the people down here. We didn't know what the house was going to be like. We didn't know what the job would be like. In fact, my 13-year-old was the most worried because he went to school and his friends told him that Lansing was a dangerous place to live. And he was really nervous about coming down here because he really thought that his life was going to be in danger coming down here. And he was terrified. But then we moved here, and the very first day he found a friend his age, a really nice kid. And then 2 days later there was another friend that he made, and just really good kids and really good friends. And he's had more of a social life here in this week than he would have all summer where we lived before. So he's starting to see the possibilities. He's starting to see the positives of being in this space. And those are the symbols of life, right? When you can see that things are going to continue and you're going to be okay, that's a sign of life. A sign of life is when things grow. We can see the possibility that we could plant a life here, that we can make a life grow here. And so the anxiety that we experienced a week or more ago has been lessened over the course of this past week because we are now seeing the possibilities of life. When we can understand that life will continue, that's when we can rest in the right now. See, when we have children and when we have grandchildren, that's another symbol of life for us, right? When we can see that even if our immediate life will come to an end, when we can see that our physical life will come to an end, if we have children and grandchildren, we know that what we have taught, what we are, will continue on in them. But even if you don't have kids, even if you don't have grandchildren, you can invest in people. You can invest your spirit and your teaching and your life into someone else. And what you put into them will live on. That's another way of seeing the continuance of your own life. So that what you have taught them, what you have helped shape the world to be, will continue on and make this world a better place. So we have these symbols of life that help us to find meaning, to find comfort, to find assurance in this life. But we also face a lot of symbols of death. It's like the opposites of those things that I mentioned before. Like when there's what we were leaving behind, we as a family have left behind familiarity. When you face things that are unfamiliar, that can bring on some anxiety, and that's a feeling of death. When you have a particular lifestyle and that lifestyle goes away, and you have to learn a new way, that's an anxious feeling and a feeling of death. Stability is a symbol of life. So instability, things when you're not sure of what's going to happen next, that's a symbol of death. We face death in a variety of ways. Of course, the main way we mostly avoid is our physical death, right? But in those other ways, we face the feeling of death on an everyday basis. When we lose familiarity, when we can't see growth, when we can't experience stability. These are death symbols, and they cause anxiety. But we, in our tradition, in the tradition that I follow in Christianity, we have a way of thinking about death that is meaningful. Our story that we live out, our story that we take into our spirits and that animates us, is that out of death comes life. Our scriptures even say this in the book of Matthew. Matthew is one of the first 4 books of the New Testament, and the Gospels are stories that are books that tell the story of Jesus Christ from 4 different perspectives. Now in Matthew, the first of the 4, it has Jesus saying, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life?" So Jesus was preparing his disciples for what he intended to do. He intended to give up all those things that are meaningful and those things that are life-affirming. He was giving up his life. He was giving up his stability. He was giving up all that was familiar. He was giving up everything. He was releasing attachment to life. He was willfully going to give his life for a purpose. Then in the 4th gospel, in the gospel according to John, Jesus said, "The hour has come for the Son of Man," that's what he called himself, the Son of Man, "to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." He's comparing himself to a grain that gets planted, that the identity of the individual grain itself is destroyed, yet it grows into something more, something fruitful, something bigger than just the individual grain. And he goes on to say, those who love their life lose it. Those who want to hold on to being that single grain, those who want to hold on to what they know, people that want to hold on to what is only stable and only what is familiar, they miss out. They miss out on so much more. They lose what they were intended to be, and so much more fruitful, so much more of who God made them to be. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world keep it for eternal life. He goes on to say, "Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor." So he's connecting what God is doing, what God is doing through him, through an abundant life, through a life that is fruitful, that is fully realized, that is bigger than we can imagine, bigger than what our lives are in our own safe concepts. He's saying, let those things go, let those attachments be, and let this new way of being show you how to live an abundant life. Of course, Jesus doesn't work in theory. He works in practice. He actually did the things that he talked about. On the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake. For an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came, rolled back the stone, and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay." A messenger of God was saying that the Jesus that they laid in this tomb when he was dead is now something else. He is more than just the grain now. He has become something entirely more than you can possibly imagine. This is a central story to the Christian faith, but perhaps you think the story of eternal life, this idea of a life after death, maybe you think that's just nonsense. Maybe you don't believe in that at all. And okay, that's fine. But there are things that we learn from the lessons of our faith that can teach you to live abundantly, even without believing in the afterlife. You can still find peace with your death, and you can find an abundant life while you still live this life. See, science even affirms that there's life that comes out of death. I mean, rotting vegetation is nutrients for new plant life, right? The cycles of the seasons here in Michigan, winter is very lifeless. It's very desolate. And then in the spring, before even the snow is all gone, the first flowers spring up out of the ground. And the trees start to bud, and oh my gosh, those of us who have seasonal allergies are very aware of when the trees start to bud. And the leaves emerge from the trees, and the grass starts to turn green, and what seemed completely dead a month before now is just full of life. And then there's the scientist that, he's popular, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He talks about not wanting to be cremated after he dies, because when you're cremated, your remains are burnt and they're converted to heat, most of it, and that heat just radiates out into the atmosphere and out into space, and he thinks that's a waste of energy. He wants his body to be in the ground. He wants the nutrients of his physical form to nourish the earth and to grow new things and to be a part of that cycle. So if you take that view, it's a purely material view of the world, in death, life still emerges. And so we look at the forms of death that we experience from that perspective, or from a spiritual perspective. When we experience a change, you might be experiencing a change in your life. You might be living in a nursing home when you weren't before. You might have been recently disabled, and you have to find a new way to live. You might be facing a new diagnosis, or maybe your child is facing a new diagnosis, and your life is very much different now. And so there's a form of death that isn't actual physical death, but it's a death of something familiar. It's a death of something that was stable. It's a death of a lifestyle. And those small deaths have to be mourned. You have to acknowledge that it hurts. You have to sometimes say, this sucks. And it's even okay to say that you miss it, even though the new thing might be blessed as well. I miss Ludington. I miss the people there, even though I have so many blessings here in Lansing. So we like to say lots of things in this faith, this Christian faith. We have lots of cliches that sort of are loaded with meaning that people from the outside may not fully get. And one of those things is that we say that in Jesus, death was defeated. And that doesn't make a lot of sense for a lot of people, because people still die, right? And we still experience these small versions of death. And it still hurts. And it still sucks. And we still miss the old way. But it's not so much that death has been defeated, but the power of death, the power of the idea of death that death has over us, the anxiety, the fear that death brings, that's been defeated. Death will still come, but we don't have to be controlled by the fear of it, or we don't have to be slave to that anxiety anymore. In fact, contemplating your own death is one of the greatest spiritual practices you can do. It might cause anxiety to begin with, but the more you contemplate it, the more you accept it, the freer you become. I have a friend who I know back in Ludington who has built his own casket. And he's not close to death, but he has a grip on it. He has a freedom from it that few people I know have. When you no longer fear it, and you no longer have to dwell on it, then you can find freedom to live life in a new way. And that's a beautiful way to live. So we're constantly surrounded by symbols of life and of death. The trick is to accept them all and to embrace the messiness of life as it is. Not to pretend that those feelings of death, those anxious feelings aren't there, and not to only dwell on the symbols of life that they give us joy. But it's a messy mixture of the two. So how's it with you today? Do you see the symbols of life and of death in your world? Pay attention to all of it. Live it, feel it, and be blessed by it. talk to you next time.
Music is provided by Bleed the Water. Check them out on Facebook. Graphic design by Holly Pole Photography. Go to hollypolephotography.com. This has been a John Pole production.